July 29th, 2016 at 1:45 a.m., a call came in to the Houston, Texas 911 dispatch. The caller reported there was a powwowing in a family home in Bel Air, a suburb in Houston, on Palmetto Drive. The caller was 16-year-old Antonio Armstrong Jr., son of former NFL and CFL pro football player Antonio Armstrong Sr. Thank you for joining me for our very first Royal Black and Elite crime documentary. Usually, when you tune in, we're talking about history, but I mentioned a few weeks ago that I really also wanted to talk about some of the crimes that impacted the Royal Black and the Elite. Now, I want to pay a great deal of respect to each family that still remains, that whose life was affected by these crimes. And I hope the perpetrators of these crimes are caught and punished to the full extent of the law. So I want to be very respectful as I talk about these people. And I want to thank you for joining me for this first documentary. Now, Antonio Armstrong Jr. and his family, they were a and senior, they were a well-respected family. And after he retired from the NFL and the CFL, they settled in Bel Air. Again, a suburb of Houston. And since I'm from Texas, that's why I did a Texas story for my first crime documentary. Now, they owned First Class Gym. So after he retired, he used his money wisely, opened up some gyms. He also served as a deacon, excuse me, he also served in the church, and he served as a motivational speaker. Now, his wife was named Dawn, and they met back when they were in college. And Antonio and Don loved one another. She had a son from a previous relationship, so his name was Josh. And so Antonio adopted him. Together, he and Don also had two other children, Antonio Armstrong Jr. and Kara, who was 12 when the call came in to 911. Shockingly, Antonio Sr. and his wife Dawn, who were pillars of the community, business owners, parents, churchgoers, I mean, everything that you could think of good people, had been pow-powed while sleeping in their bed. Now, as I do these stories, I'll use words that are YouTube friendly. So when I say pow-powed, you know what I mean. And there'll be some other words, but they'll be, self-explanatory. Now, Dawn had been pop out two times, and it was right behind her ear, and she passed away on the scene. Antonio Sr. lasted just a little bit longer, but he passed away after arriving at the hospital. Now, before the night was over, their son, Antonio Armstrong Jr., which everybody called AJ, so I'm going to call him AJ so we don't confuse the two. He was charged as a juvenile with capital unaliving, and it sparked a 7-year court battle that continues today. You see, just recently in December, he filed a motion, an appeal to his conviction because the person who testified against him about a speck on the collar of his shirt under a tag was fired from the Houston Police Department. They were a lab tech and they were fired because of shoddy work. So he filed an appeal. But that wasn't the only questionable thing in the case, so let's keep going. The police investigation revealed that there was no forced entry. They pointed to a strained relationship that the Armstrongs were having with their son and the lies that AJ told while being investigated. Now, I have a lot of questions like why would the police be investigating and interrogating him with no lawyer present and he was an adolescent? So that was a big question that I had. The defense also had that question, and they had a few other questions. Like number one, there was no pow dust on AJ's hand. Number two, the security system was on the blink. So they said that there was no other people in the home. There had been no reports that any doors had been opened or closed, so that the perpetrator had to have come from inside the house. But the defense said, again, ADT, which was the security system, reportedly had several reports of the system going off haphazardly and that it was broken. And Kara, the daughter who was 12 years old, also said the same thing. And to the fact that their family was having some confrontations with AJ, well, the defense said that was just because he was a teenager and he was going through what normal teenagers go through. But the police said on the call that AJ said two things that really made him a suspect. Number one, he said that it was all his fault. And number two, he said when asked if he had any injuries by the 911 dispatcher, he said his ears were ringing. The police said the only time that your ears could ring is if you were around pow fire. So this is the kind of back and forth that was happening around the case. Now let's go over some of the inconsistencies that came out during the investigation and some of the things that AJ didn't tell the truth about that kind of even made him look even more guilty. So one thing was there was a hole in the ceiling of his parents' bedroom. They asked him about it. How'd the hole get there? He played like he didn't know what was going on, but then come to find out, he had, well, according to him, propelled a weapon through his floor, showing out for a friend of his. So that's how this hole supposedly got into the parents' ceiling. The parents hadn't even confronted him about it because they hadn't even noticed it at that time. Now, when asked, okay, thank you for that, explanation. Let me talk to your friend and verify what it is that you've said. Then he changed his story and said, well, my friend left, so he wasn't there when I pop out, and so he didn't see me do it, but I thought you were doing it for the friend. So you see what I'm saying? There was some inconsistencies to his stories. Some other things that also was, didn't look quite right was that the fact that he had set a fire in front of his parents' bedroom door and he used an accelerant. And his father smelled the smoke. He put the fire out and it's like, what's going on here? So they were, AJ was doing some things. Yes, I do understand that parents and children do have some time things that happen in the relationship, but these are some heavy things. Trying to burn up your parents' home, plowing the weapon through the floor, and really not being able to justify why he did it, lying about handling a pow. He said he hadn't handled one. So these things really hurt him, I do believe, in this case. And it may have been because he forgot, he was scared, he knew he had done wrong as far as, pow the weapon through the floor. So there were some things that maybe he didn't tell the truth on. So that was kind of the inconsistencies on his side. But on the police side, of course, we talked about some of the things earlier, but there was one other thing. There was a letter written. And the letter was clean. There was no fingerprints on the letter, but AJ's DNA wasn't found on the letter either. So if someone wrote a letter, it seemed like to me AJ, there would be his fingerprints on it. And I mentioned the lady who got into trouble because she was doing shoddy work for the Houston Police Department and really is the basis for his new appeal. Her name was Rochelle Austin. Well, they found this little speck of supposedly DNA on AJ's name tag that he had put on when he went into the police department when he was being interrogated. And they found this 7 years after the fact. This woman has some questionable things in her record as far as is she a good worker or not. And so, these all these things were playing into this case. So when they went to court the first time, and his lawyer was Rick DeToto, he no longer has an attorney. The family says that his finances have been strained, so his appeal is actually being filed by a public defender. But the first case took place in March 2019. They both came with what we just talked about, what the offense was, what the defense was. And in the first trial, it ended. It began in March 2019. It ended in April in a mistrial. Now, all this time, AJ was on house arrest because the family had come up with enough money to help him do that. So he went back home and he was tried again, the second trial in October of 2022. Now, here's where the plot thickens. You see, by the second trial, the police department had gotten AJ's telephone. And now they had unlocked it. And there were some text messages and some things that further incriminated AJ. Also, interestingly, they said that they were able to determine that at 1:08 a.m., AJ, after he got off the phone with his girlfriend, then her name is Kate Ober, and Kate is his wife. Well, was his wife. She actually just filed for divorce in December 2024. So she had been with him since high school. She had been with him through all of the court cases, but she's now divorcing him. So we'll keep you posted about that as a follow up as we watch this case unfold. But they said after he got off the phone with his girlfriend, the phone came off the charger and moved throughout the house. So they could tell he was moving through the home. Didn't even know that they could do that, but they added that into the further evidence that they had against this young man. But that still was not enough, and they had a mistrial again. Well, you would think they would stop, but they didn't stop trying him because in August they tried him again, and this time they came in with all of that evidence and the DNA. And the DNA, in addition to everything else, at the end of this trial in August of 2023, he was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison because he was a juvenile when the crime was committed. He could have parole after 40 years. So that is the case of AJ Armstrong. So those are the three cases. They were mistrials until the third one where he was found guilty. Now, where does the case stand today? Well, with all of the things that all of this discrepancies on both sides. I mean, I laid it out for you. There are definitely discrepancies on the defensive side. There's discrepancies on the prosecution side. So with all of this, he asked for another trial. The judge did deny it for a fourth trial. So what they did is they went in and stopped the appeal because they wanted to do an appeal and they kicked it back to they wanted to be kicked back to the judge Kelly Johnson at the original trial, but they said no. So now he's going through an appeal. Now the jury says that the DNA is not what convicted him. It was all the rest of the evidence. Given that he had already been through two trials and they had the same evidence, but he didn't get convicted until that third trial where they brought in the DNA evidence. Now all of a sudden he's convicted. Are you sure you didn't use the DNA? So these are some of the questions that I'm sure his now court-appointed attorney, because he doesn't have the money to pay for an attorney now, will bring out. So what do you think about this case? Finally, the other thing that were some discrepancies within the case is that it was said that Antonio Sr. was involved with some nefarious things, including women, some other stuff. Now, these things had never been proven. In fact, every time they would point to something else, the investigators would say they investigated, but there was no proof, there was no evidence, and so they dismissed the stuff. So, but anyway, they were saying that he had gotten some threats on his life a few weeks before the unaliving happened. So they said Nothing ever came of it. There were no threatening calls on his telephone. But then, after they were unalived, his gems were broken into. Interesting. So you see what I'm saying? This story just gets thicker and deeper and deeper. These are questions that have to be answered. Is it just by coincidence that they get unalived and the gym gets broken into? That there's a letter there with no DNA? That there's an on the fritz security system? His family is standing by him firmly. The grandmother and everybody is standing by him firmly. But on the other side, there's no DNA of anyone else in the home. There's no evidence that no one was even in the home but the children. So it had to either be him or Kara. And because he had already been getting in trouble and doing some things, it the burden of proof, excuse me, the evidence all pointed to him. The final thing that was kind of shady in this case was that Josh, the son that Don had and that Mr. Armstrong Sr. had adopted. AJ's attorneys tried to put the unaliving on him. Now, upon investigation, it proven that he hadn't done anything wrong. He was just getting his life together. He had was in school, but he had left school. He was back home. He was trying to work, trying to go to school. He'd gotten into some trouble. So, but he was getting his life together. And he loved his mama. When you saw some of the text messages that came in from Don and Josh, you could see the love that he had for his mom. So he didn't do this. Unfortunately, though, but because of what happened, because of them, his brother blaming him for this to try to stay out of jail, Josh didn't do well. He checked himself into a hospital, and then he checked himself out. The family does not know where Josh is at the timing of this tape, and they don't know what happened to him. So that is yet still to be discovered. We pray that he is okay. This was a horrible story. Whoever did this to them, it really tore up an entire family. And even AJ, he's a father now. He has a son. So much has happened in this story, and I am honored to be able to bring it to you to honor the lives of Antonio Sr. and Don Armstrong. I hope that this case comes to a close, that they find justice in this case, and I want to know what you think. Given all of the discrepancies, but given the prosecution's pretty strong case as well, what do you think? So I thank you for joining me for today's first Royal Black and Elite Crime Mystery Documentary. Join me again for another episode, and thank you for watching.